You're watching Narrify.
I used to think marriage was supposed to be a partnership, a kind of invisible promise that no matter how hard life got, you always had one person in your corner. When I married Sarah in Portland, Oregon, I thought I'd found that person. She had this calm, easy smile that made everyone feel like she was listening only to them. Back then, I didn't notice the way she used silence as a weapon, how she could twist a conversation until you felt guilty for things you never did. We lived in a modest two-story home on the edge of town, one of those neighborhoods where every yard looked freshly mowed and neighbors waved, even if they didn't remember your name. I worked long hours managing a small construction company, often coming home too tired to cook, while she worked part-time at a local boutique and spent her afternoons helping her sister, Megan, who'd recently moved back from Seattle after a messy breakup. My uncle, Tom, visited often. He'd retired early from a logistics job and had too much time on his hands. He dropped by under the pretense of checking in, but I later realized he liked the attention Sarah gave him. At first, I thought it was harmless. Sarah was friendly, Tom was lonely, and I was busy. But over time, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Small changes, quiet shifts in energy that made our house feel colder even when the heater was running. The first red flag came one Friday evening when I came home early. Sarah wasn't expecting me. She told me she'd be out with Megan for the day, but when I pulled into the driveway, I saw Tom's truck parked a few houses down, not in front of ours. Inside, the air smelled faintly of whiskey and cologne. She was sitting on the couch, startled when she saw me. Tom stepped out of the kitchen holding two glasses, laughing nervously like he'd been caught sneaking out of a bar. "We were just talking," he said quickly. Sarah nodded too fast. "He stopped by to help with the gutters." The gutters? It hadn't rained in a week. I remember forcing a laugh, pretending not to care, because admitting my suspicion would make me sound insecure. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe them both. I convinced myself it was nothing and went upstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I just walked in on something that wasn't supposed to happen yet. That night, she climbed into bed beside me, scrolling through her phone, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering why her screen was turned away from me. Things started unraveling in small, almost invisible ways. Tom began showing up more often when I wasn't home. Megan, who had always been chatty, grew distant. She used to call me brother-in-law with a teasing grin, but now she barely made eye contact. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with this mixture of pity and discomfort, as if she knew something she wished she didn't. When I confronted Sarah about it, she'd sigh and tell me I was paranoid. "Tom's just lonely," she'd say. "You know how he gets." And I'd back off, ashamed of my own doubt. I started drinking more after work, sitting alone in the truck outside our house just to gather the strength to walk in. She stopped cooking. She stopped laughing. She started dressing up even when she said she was just running errands. Then came the money issues. Our joint savings account began to drain faster than usual. She blamed online orders, bills, just things adding up. But when I asked for receipts, she'd snap that I didn't trust her. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I checked her laptop. There were messages, hidden but not deleted, between her and Tom. They weren't outright incriminating, but they were wrong. Inside jokes, private plans, things like, "I'll handle him and don't worry, he believes everything." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely close the screen. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I just watched her pour coffee like nothing was wrong, humming to herself. That's when I realized she'd been planning something bigger than just lying. Over the next few weeks, it became clear what that plan was. She started talking about refinancing the house, about investing smartly. She convinced me to sign some papers she said were for tax adjustments. I was exhausted, beaten down, and I signed without reading. That was my mistake. Within 2 months, I was informed by the bank that my name had been quietly removed from the property. The house was now legally hers. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She just looked at me calmly and said, "You never paid attention. You made it easy." I wanted to scream, to grab my keys and drive until I ran out of gas, but I froze. That same week, Tom stopped answering my calls, and Megan moved out of state. It all hit at once, the betrayal, the manipulation, the emptiness. I started sleeping in my truck. The neighbors whispered, and Sarah told anyone who asked that I'd become unstable. Her family believed her. Of course they did. She cried, played the victim, told them I'd been controlling and angry. Nobody asked for my side. My own uncle had vanished into silence, and the woman I'd promised to protect had taken everything I owned. And yet, some part of me still loved her. I hated that about myself. The part that remembered our first Christmas together, the long drives along Highway 101, the way she used to trace circles on my arm when I couldn't sleep. That love became a curse, keeping me tied to the ghost of a life that no longer existed. After the house was gone, after the betrayal had been fully realized, I had nowhere to go. My friends had drifted away, too polite or too scared to take sides. My family barely returned my calls, and every attempt to explain myself seemed to backfire. So I ended up in my old pickup truck, parked on the quiet streets of our neighborhood, the engine off, staring at the dark sky, listening to the soft hum of the city that had once felt familiar but now seemed alien. Nights were long, the cold seeping into my bones even under a thin blanket. I started keeping a small bag with essentials in the back, food I could grab at 24-hour diners, a thermos of coffee that went cold before I drank it. Days blurred into nights and nights into days. I found myself walking long stretches through town just to escape the silence of my truck, pacing past rows of homes where neighbors laughed, cooked, and lived the kind of life that had been ripped from me. One morning, after a restless sleep on the cracked leather seat, I decided I couldn't wait for her to make another move. I had to know the full extent of what had been done. I went to my uncle's house. Tom lived alone in a modest split level, the kind of place where you could hear the neighbor's TV through thin walls. I knocked on the door, heart hammering in my chest, and when he answered, his expression was one of practiced cheer. "Hey, buddy," he said, trying to sound casual. But I saw it in his eyes, the hesitation, the faint flicker of guilt. I stepped inside anyway. "We need to talk," I said. His smile faltered. We sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight falling across the peeling linoleum. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What did you do?" I asked, voice low. "How far did you go with Sarah and Megan?" Tom leaned back, rubbing his forehead. He didn't answer immediately. He knew I already knew more than he wanted me to. "Look," he said finally, "I didn't force anything. I just went along. I thought it was harmless at first. I didn't realize how far it would go." The words were soft, almost pleading, but they didn't absolve him. He had been part of the manipulation from the start, part of the web that had pulled me under. He admitted to spreading lies, twisting stories in the family's favor, feeding Megan's rumors about me, and even helping Sarah handle legal and financial paperwork so that I would be sidelined. My hands shook, not from fear but from anger. Every word he said carved deeper into the wounds I already carried. I left his house without a word, the air thick and suffocating. Over the next few weeks, I began to dig through everything I had left. Old emails, bank statements, and bits of correspondence Sarah had thought I'd never see. I started keeping a journal, writing down every memory, every detail that could later serve as proof of what had happened. The process was exhausting, painful, and oddly therapeutic. Each piece I uncovered confirmed the betrayal in a way that made my anger coalesce into something more focused. I realized that while I had lost a home, a sense of stability, and the love I thought I had, I still had my mind and my ability to fight back. That realization became a lifeline. I also began noticing small things in daily life that reminded me of her manipulations. The neighbor who used to wave at me but now pretended not to see me, the cashier at the grocery store who always looked at me like she expected me to be dangerous, the way emails from her still arrived addressed to me, even though I'd been removed from accounts. The world seemed designed to isolate me, and yet, ironically, it gave me perspective. I started seeing patterns, how easily trust could be twisted, how manipulation could infect ordinary, mundane interactions. I began taking small steps to reclaim control. Setting up a P.O. box for mail, taking on freelance work to earn a little money, and talking cautiously with a coworker I could trust, someone who had noticed Sarah's duplicity long before I did. Their quiet support was a small but significant anchor. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I would drive aimlessly around the outskirts of town, thinking about what had been stolen from me. My marriage, my home, the sense of safety. I replayed every moment, trying to remember where I had gone wrong, what signs I had ignored, and whether there was anything I could have done differently. The answers were never simple. The truth was that some people are just extraordinarily skilled at deception, and when combined with the loyalty or fear of those around them, even the most grounded life could crumble. Megan had moved on to her own life, and Tom had retreated into a version of normalcy, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. One morning, I decided to confront the financial realities. I went to the bank and asked for copies of every document Sarah had signed over the past 6 months. The teller, polite but firm, handed me the paperwork, and as I flipped through it, I realized the depth of the strategy she had executed. Every transaction, every legal maneuver had been calculated. And yet, she had underestimated me. She hadn't anticipated that I would quietly observe, record, and keep notes of every interaction. I began organizing evidence meticulously, knowing that even if I couldn't reclaim everything, I could at least assert the truth in a way that might prevent further harm. The hardest part wasn't the legal or financial loss. It was the emotional toll. I had trusted her completely, loved her without reservation, and now the memory of that love was both comforting and excruciating. I would see her in the grocery store, smiling politely, her eyes flicking toward me, and I would feel a strange mix of nostalgia and revulsion. Every interaction reminded me that life doesn't offer closure in neat packages. Sometimes it's just a long series of small lessons learned the hard way. By the time the first few months passed, I had managed to carve out a fragile existence. I rented a small apartment across town, far from the neighborhood that had become a reminder of betrayal. I returned to work with renewed focus, though my demeanor had changed, quieter, more observant, wary of the friendliness of others. Yet, I also began to feel something I hadn't allowed myself in months, a sense of determination. The story wasn't over. Sarah and her allies might have taken my home, my comfort, and my social footing, but they hadn't taken my agency. I had a chance to reclaim something more important, my own narrative. Even in those long, lonely nights, sitting in that small apartment with the faint hum of traffic outside, I realized I had become someone different, someone harder, wiser, and more careful. I wasn't naive anymore. I had seen the ways people could manipulate, the ways trust could be weaponized, and the ways love could be turned into a tool for destruction. And while I didn't have revenge in mind, I understood that the world had given me a rare gift, knowledge of the inner workings of betrayal. That knowledge I knew would be my shield moving forward. By the time the fall leaves started piling along the curbs of Portland streets, I had learned to exist without illusions. My life was smaller than it had been, but it was mine again. I rented a tiny apartment in a quiet part of town, far enough from the neighborhood that held ghosts, and spent my days reconstructing my identity, one careful choice at a time. Work became my anchor. Every project I managed, every hour I put into supervising crews, I treated as if it were a lifeline. And slowly, through the haze of betrayal, I started noticing patterns I had once ignored. Sarah and Megan were still active in their circles, still orchestrating minor deceptions, still relying on Tom to reinforce narratives that painted me as unstable and unreasonable. But they were sloppy. Overconfidence made them predictable, and predictability is the one thing manipulators fear most. Exposure. It started with small discoveries. I noticed Megan posting innocuous messages on social media, cryptic complaints about a mess that could have been avoided, or lying for the wrong people. They were vague enough that no one would question them too deeply, but I knew better. I had trained myself to read between the lines, to recognize the subtle cues that revealed intention. Then came the financial discrepancies. Small transfers, mismanaged funds, receipts that didn't add up. It became clear that Sarah had been siphoning money, redirecting resources, even leveraging my absence to her advantage. Each revelation stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. For the first time since losing the house, I felt power returning. Not power over them, but power over the narrative they thought they had written. One evening, I reached out to Tom. Not angrily, not with threats, just a careful conversation. "I know what you did," I said, calm but firm. He hesitated, then admitted the extent of his involvement. He had been complicit in Sarah's schemes, feeding her information, helping to manipulate documents, and occasionally covering for her lies when I questioned her about financial matters. "I didn't know it would go this far," he whispered, a shadow of regret in his voice. Hearing it didn't relieve my anger, it fueled it, but it also clarified everything. They had underestimated me completely. They hadn't realized that a man pushed to the edge, stripped of everything, could learn patience, observation, and subtle strategy. From there, I began carefully documenting everything. Conversations, emails, transactions, social interactions, they all went into a binder I kept under lock and key. I wasn't planning an overt confrontation yet. I was gathering undeniable evidence, readying myself for the moment when the truth could not be denied. In the meantime, I focused on survival, freelancing, repairing my credit, and slowly reconnecting with coworkers and neighbors who hadn't been involved in the deception. A small circle of genuine allies formed, people who recognized my integrity despite the slander that had followed me. Their quiet support reminded me that not all trust is misplaced, that not everyone is blinded by charm or misled by manipulation. Then came the confrontation. It was subtle at first. A question here, a pointed remark there, designed to make Sarah slip, to reveal cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She laughed nervously at first, dismissing my questions, but over time, the pattern of my observations began to unsettle her. Friends who had once blindly supported her now hesitated, asking minor questions, doubting small details. Tom grew tense. Megan started to avoid my gaze. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls she had built around her deception began to tremble. I realized then that victory was not about dramatic accusations, but about patience, strategy, and the quiet accumulation of undeniable truth. The final confrontation happened in the quiet of my apartment one evening. Sarah arrived under the pretense of talking things through. I had gathered everything: documents, screenshots, and witness statements from Tom and a few cautious friends who were willing to testify. I spread the evidence across my kitchen table. "Do you recognize these?" I asked calmly. Her face paled, though she tried to maintain composure. I could see the realization dawning. The careful plan she had executed, the people she had manipulated, even the small lies she had counted on to protect herself, were all exposed. Megan didn't speak. She just watched, a mixture of fear and disbelief on her face. Tom's head was bowed, silently acknowledging his complicity. Sarah tried to argue, to charm, to gaslight, but the evidence was overwhelming. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I simply laid out the facts, one by one, watching her facade crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. In that moment, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since the first weeks of betrayal. The house, the lost money, the ruined friendships, none of that could be undone. But for the first time, I realized something essential. Their power over me was gone. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had survived the manipulation, and the knowledge of what they had done would prevent it from happening again. The aftermath was quiet but definitive. Sarah and Megan withdrew from my life, realizing that their usual tactics no longer worked. Tom, shamed by his own complicity, kept his distance. I didn't seek revenge. There was no public humiliation, no dramatic confrontation with neighbors or extended family. The resolution was private, internal, and absolute. I rebuilt slowly: my apartment, my work, my confidence. The scars remained, emotional and psychological, but they were no longer shackles. They were reminders of resilience, lessons about human nature, and the painful costs of misplaced trust. I started noticing life differently. I saw subtle dishonesty in colleagues, small manipulations among friends, and the ways charm can mask intent. But I also noticed kindness, loyalty, and the quiet courage of people willing to stand by truth even when inconvenient. These observations shaped how I moved forward, carefully, wisely, and with boundaries I had never set before. I reconnected with neighbors, deepened friendships cautiously, and started making long-term plans that were entirely my own. For the first time in years, I felt the sense of security that comes not from others, but from understanding the world, yourself, and the limits of trust. In the end, Sarah's betrayal taught me a harsh but invaluable lesson. Love can be weaponized, trust can be abused, and those closest to you can become the architects of your downfall. But survival, patience, and clarity of mind can reclaim what seems lost. I had lost a home, a life I thought secure, and the naive sense of certainty I once carried. But I had gained insight, strength, and an unshakable understanding of human nature. I had survived betrayal, endured isolation, and emerged quietly victorious. Not through public spectacle, but through endurance, observation, and careful assertion of truth. Some nights, I still remember the calm before it all fell apart. Sarah's laughter, Megan's teasing, Tom's easy smile. Those memories hurt, but they also remind me of what I overcame. Life continues not as it was, but as it must be, cautious, aware, and resilient. And though the scars never fade, they are proof that even in the deepest darkness, a person can survive, rebuild, and reclaim the dignity that others sought to destroy.